I'll look at your shoes too.
No, that's all right.
No, those are fine too.
Well, pretty innocuous. All right, so well, I've done everything that we can do.
Awesome. Okay, and maybe I should go in like in the middle. So, what are your names? Liz Schulte here. Schulte. And then Uncle Bogert that I Bogert. Never met him. I was reading about him. I'm like, I asked my mom's name. Like, do you know him? I swear we must know him. No, evidently we don't. But nice. So familiar. Okay, I'm gonna go get my water. Okay, I'm turning this onto vibrate. I'm gonna drop food. You're here? No spring break trips planned?
Well, my kids have a 2-week spring break, and so we went last week to Moab.
Nice.
And, they're in a camp this week up here.
That's awesome then.
Yeah.
How was it?
Moab was awesome.
Yeah.
I've never been before. It was incredible.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, the 2 national parks that are right down there.
Yeah.
Are just unbelievable.
Nice job.
Yeah.
Good choice. Were there other spring breaks that coincided, or did you have a good run at the place?
I mean, there were definitely other people there, but
Yeah.
it to me did not feel
Not spring
crowded
breaky.
at
Okay, that's
all.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
You know, those I don't think those 2 parks get nearly the traffic that, you know, some of the other
Like it.
more common ones. Like I was blown away by Canyonlands because there's some spots there where the views are like every bit as dramatic as they are at Grand Canyon,
Yes.
but
Yes.
they're not the hubbub
Yes.
of, you know, the massive humanity. So that,
Uh,
and Arches
tell
was
other people. Don't tell.
yeah,
Like I went to undergrad in Utah. I'm like, I know, but we don't tell.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Arches was good for kids because
Yeah.
there's so much stuff for them to climb on.
Yeah. Right.
So
Oh, that's
the
great.
kids really liked Arches. I liked them both,
Yeah.
but Canyonlands is my favorite
Yeah.
just because I wasn't expecting
Sure.
what I ended up seeing. So
Right. No, they do have some pretty
Thank you.
country.
Hello.
Hi there. No problem.
how you been?
I'm pretty good. Now for some much needed R&R fishing.
You just came back or you're about to go? Oh yeah.
Steelhead fishing up in Chalice.
Oh nice.
My son is flying back to Ohio with his mother, and so
Oh, is that where she's originally from?
yeah. So anytime I get time away from the kid, I've learned to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Well,
Hey, how's it going, Mark?
good. We had to get up at 3 this morning for our flight at 5:30.
Oh nice. Yeah, we've done that a few times too. Boise's not, even though the airport's really nice and all that, it's not the easiest place to get to directly. Dang.
It's just one of those words that I long ago decided that's what it sounds like.
Is that for our Skype connection?
Yeah, it's over this Google Hangouts, and it seems to be finicky. Like, you know, I do it the same way every time, but sometimes the people don't get the emails that are supposed to give them the link to join it.
So you're at Idaho Power now?
Yeah,
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
yeah, this a few months ago.
Oh, congratulations! Cool.
Okay. Read this.
You're working with Sarah Heiger. And,
Yeah, a little bit.
yeah.
Not too much, just experiencing fatherhood.
So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, congrats. You know,
Christmas.
I was just thinking about that,
Yes.
about you and that
Yes.
question, like
Gonna check and
last week for some odd reason.
So she might be able to see.
Had a kid or what?
Yeah, on Christmas
Yeah.
Day.
Michael, this is Dylan.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
you know,
How are you?
the older he gets, the better it gets. The first of the month, it's like go back inside there.
What do you want?
He's smiling now. I think he's pretty close to crawling.
How are you?
Good.
Hey, David, Michael Bogert, good to see you. How are you?
No, I'm back in the back.
Nice to meet you.
I
You
don't
don't
know
know
where
about
I.
this than me.
Oh, I don't know. I try to stay the heck away from the secret.
How are you doing? Good, how are you?
Not more than what I understand. How's your new kid?
Doing all right.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of it.
Working much with Sarah?
A little bit.
I know, I'm like Victoria's.
Hey, David. Sam.
How are you?
That's a good choice. Yeah.
Hi, Sam. What's the name?
What division or what are you working on?
In disguise to go.
It's all right.
Do a lot of.
Hi, you're good.
Transmission line
You're fine,
projects.
there's still some at the table if you want. I just went back. You're fine.
Permitting, Litigation management,
Okay.
and some other spotty real estate, PLM, Forest Service stuff.
So Michael, we can check. Are you guys on the phone? You're not muted,
How
are you?
many attorneys are there?
I'm on the phone.
Liz, you're there?
This is Liz Schulte.
Hi.
Do you see work?
Well,
And I'm
Michael.
able to pull you guys up and I can see you on my computer.
Hi.
Oh, is that right?
Okay, hi. Okay, that's even better.
Did somebody successfully?
Yeah, Liz, is-
Oh,
she's
good.
got in.
Oh, nice.
Yay. Well, I'll have Dylan say hi in a second,
Goes through that.
Okay.
because he's the one responsible for that tech part.
And I don't think
That's a
I'm,
scary state of
speaking through the
affairs.
Hangout system.
Okay.
I'm just on the phone hub, but I can see.
Wow, that'll be perfect. So she'll be able to see you.
Oh, no.
Is it working? Yeah, Liz is on. She can see us.
Yeah, and it shows we have one viewer.
Okay,
Is
so
that Andrea?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm Andrea, and then Liz, the other
No,
Liz
that's
just
the
came
well,
in.
yeah, they filed that.
So we
They
maybe
can
like you
vote
already.
so much. And so I think I've got this ready for you to vote down there.
All right, so all you need to do is, so, okay, great. So this is, I will, I'll operate the,
Projects.
It'll be the manual work.
Very crazy.
Yeah,
I'm just-
I know Eric.
I'm just trying to say-
Oh, Sammy, I really
That's
Species council, right? Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So I said, you spoke of water use.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I noticed
Something
they do great work.
But something memorable like that.
Yeah.
Because I get. But so I was in on the conference for 8 years. Okay, that's how small I think it's likely more now, actually.
Totally, like,
Oh, the end of the people.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll say hello.
I will, yeah.
Maybe I think I
They will.
Glad you could join us. You're always in court.
Yeah.
This is, well, I had to show for this one, so like, exactly what I want.
Oh, okay, good.
So, constantly.
We'll just have a couple of business things.
Yeah.
She wanted to, I'll take it Tuesday.
All right, well, good to see you. Hopefully we can find a place to sit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It happens like I don't have to.
After
Like, there's times.
All right, I gotta
Oh, yeah.
And, so by the time my kids get fish, 40 something.
I'm really missing that. You.
That would be great. Yeah, for that, and I'll be waiting for the second one. So just keep going.
Started enjoying it.
I'm confident I'll learn my six.
So, yeah.
Yeah, she is.
Yes.
No, no, waitlisted in jail. I really want to go tell her. I think I lost my friend.
Yeah.
She's got a YouTube. She spent half of her high school life as a YouTube channel with 30,000
I'll be back there in a minute.
She was teacher.
Downtown.
Yeah, I had a great time.
Thank you. Send that around. Yeah.
Feels much better than before.
How's it going? You got a place to sit? Okay, good.
I'm just gonna sit here. People just come through all this food.
All right.
I think I moved her back.
You know, I think you know, the guys are all very good.
Yeah, there's one down there, so
Yeah.
maybe I'll see.
Crystal lived in Crystal Alleyway. It's exciting and tired.
How's it going, Greg? All right. All right, how about you?
Playing Mr. Mom.
All for being here today. Big crowd, which is always fun. Communication is a big topic. Can we just confirm again who all we have on the phone?
Ty Bear on the phone in DC.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Liz Schulte in Salt Lake City.
Perfect. Anyone else? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We actually have 2 guest speakers today, just for a quick business proposal question before we get things underway. So I will turn it over to Maureen Braley here to chat with us real quick about access to justice.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me come. I won't take up too much of your time because it's like a full house, full room, full agenda. So last year I came and talked to your section about being a sponsor for the Access to Justice Fun Run. The Access to Justice campaign that benefits the Idaho Legal Aid, Disability Rights of Idaho, and the Idaho Volunteer Lawyers Program. So last year was the first year I created this 5K run walk to support that cause. And I asked for different firms and sections to sponsor the event in order to cover all the costs. So then people's $25 entry fee to participate in the event would go straight to the Access to Justice campaign. And last year, I'm proud to say we did get enough sponsorships. All of the money that individual participants gave for their entry fee went to the campaign. Last year we had over 100 people register. It was really fun. It's a 5K course around Fort Boise. People brought their strollers, their kids, their dogs. So it would be great if your section would consider either a $250 or $500 sponsorship of the event. That would go a long way to covering costs like permitting, road barricades, food and beverage for event participants. And even if I know there's other financial requests that your section considers, if you can't make a contribution to the event this year, then still, if you can participate, encourage your members to do it. Really, it's a lot of fun, great event for a great cause. So I have some flyers here for you. I have not set up the online race registration yet, but I will probably the first week of April. So check out the Idaho Law Foundation's website for information about that. If you do sponsor the event, then your section will be featured on the back of our event t-shirt, and you could put section information in our race packets that everybody who does the event gets right before the race. So any questions about this? Yeah.
What date would you like to have a decision from us or donation from us?
The event itself is Saturday, May 16th, but just given the nature of the cause and my ability to tap into the Access to Justice bank account, I don't need it before then necessarily. Like you could pledge and get it by the end of the year. Okay. So yeah, that's a good question because I know you are considering other. So if you need to stagger me out a little bit, that I would still appreciate it. Thank you so much. Any questions, you can call, email me. I work at the State Bar. This is not my official capacity. This is my volunteer capacity, but you can find me there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. And we also have Edith and Silo here to chat with us briefly.
Hi, everybody. I'm asking for money too. I do know some of you, some familiar faces. I did the Access to Justice Fun Run last year, and it really is fun. And the T-shirts are better than those usual T-shirts that you get. So I encourage you to participate in that. I'm here to talk to you and ask you for money. First of all, I'm here as a representative of Attorney Specific Education, which is a new project within the government section. And we go by ACE, which is the acronym for Attorney Specific Education. I'm going to leave you some information about ACE and about the National Mock Trial, which is what I'm here to ask you about. So ACE, I just want to tell you a little bit about ACE first. ACE was created in response to IOLTA funding that decreased for civic education programs. A lot of you probably are aware that IOLTA funding has decreased by like 80% over the last 5 years. So that's a huge chunk for programs like the mock trial, We the People, and the YMCA Youth and Government Program. The other funding source was Congress, and Congress has completely cut funding for We the People. So schools that want to participate in that program have to raise the money themselves or get it through grants or what have you. So Attorneys for Civic Education was created to help raise awareness about these programs, help raise money for these programs, and help raise volunteers for these programs because they need coaches and judges and all kinds of things. So these are K through 12 programs that schools take on voluntarily, and teachers have to go get training, they have to buy books, curriculum, etc. So it's expensive, but it is so important. These programs are great. And I have information here on the web, on our website where you can go and find out more about each of those. I'm not going to tell you too much about them now. So that's ACE. And this year, in addition to those 3 programs that I mentioned, we have taken on fundraising for the National Mock Trial, which many of you may know, is coming to Boise in 2016. So in May, a year from now, the national mock trial will be in Boise. So that's like the National Spelling Bee or the Science Olympiad or something of that magnitude. It's a really big deal for Boise. We expect about 1,000 visitors, which includes the participants themselves, the competitors, their families, their coaches, their teachers. So it's going to be a very big deal and very exciting. As you can imagine, it costs a lot of money and it needs a lot of volunteers, whether they're judges who, lawyers who act as judges or non-lawyers who do other volunteer things, because it's about a 4-day event, including the day they get here and the day they leave. There's all kinds of volunteer opportunities for you. And I'm going to leave you with this National Mock Trial flyer with some information about how to get involved if you are interested. Now, I'm here to ask for money, though, today. ACE has taken on a commitment to raise $8,000 to pay for the students' lunches on the 2 days of competition. It's traditional that the host city pays for that, so students aren't running around trying to find lunch during this 1 hour in the middle of competition. And if any of you have participated in mock trial, it's intense, and they just get a sack lunch and go. So this is our way of helping with that. We have committed to $8,000, and we're asking every section. I know all sections have a variety of budgets, so anybody who contributes up to $3,500 will get their name in the program that is circulated to these participants. You'll also get a mention in the Advocate, and if there's money left, there will be an ad in the Statesman as well. So whether you contributed $5, which I'm not asking for, or $1,000, which is what I'm asking for, you'll get the same recognition. Nobody will know. So I encourage you, even if you can't do the 1,000, think about 500 or 250 or whatever this section can give. We would really appreciate. And then briefly, also wanted to tell you, I'm not going to ask you for money, but I am going to ask you to check out on the ACE website, which is on this flyer, go and look at the Hour for Civics campaign. And I encourage you as individuals to participate in the Hour for Civics, which is another fundraiser that will encourage you to donate the equivalent of 1 billable hour, whatever that is for you. I work for the government, so. Some of us, yeah. So, but anyway, if you can contribute that amount, it all adds up. So we are trying to help these programs stay afloat. It's really at that point where they're running out of money. So we think that it's a great opportunity for attorneys to step in and really help these programs that are teaching constitutional history. They're teaching about how the legislature works. They're teaching all about how government works. And these are in-depth programs. These are really intense, year-long programs. It's not sort of, your general, well, what's the Fourth Amendment kind of thing. It's in-depth historical knowledge that really creates better citizens. So I encourage you to look at the Hour for Civics program and consider donating to that. And I will leave these with you to pass around. And if you want any more information, please feel free to contact me. Liz will have my contact information. And with that, I'll let you get on with your usual program. Thanks a lot for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, any time before the end of the year is great, but we really are shooting for the fall so that we have a commitment and we know we need to go out and do because the end of the year is 1 week ago. Okay, cool.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Okay. So interestingly enough, we also got an email recently for another donation request, which was from the Professionalism and Ethics section of the bar. They are working with law school students and having lawyers and judges from all over Idaho travel to chat with and help the Concordia Law students learn more about professionalism and ethics. Their series of programs, it sounds like cost more than $10,000 to put on last year. And so they were looking for a donation from our section to help defray these costs. Again, I don't think it's something that needs an immediate turnaround, but something that maybe we can have a quick discussion maybe next month. We have a little more time just about donation requests in general, or we can send an email out summarizing these so we have a little more time to think about it. So keep that in mind as well. And also last month's meeting minutes, anyone have any objections to those, or can we move to approve them? They were great, and thank you, Dylan, for putting them together.
I second the motion.
Perfect. Let's see, we're still working on a mentorship
All in favor of
program.
approving?
All right.
Motion carries.
Just have so much confidence in you guys. I know that we're doing good with opposition. Right. So just to check in on our mentorship program with ELS, we're still working through the details. We have a list of members interested, but we're just kind of orchestrating how that could work before we, have any more discussions with you guys on about it. Advocate article submissions were due March 11th. Nick's not here, but I assume anyone who's working on that with him is in the loop, in the know. We're also, I think we have some good CLEs lined up for the next couple of months. In April, we're gonna try to get Joe Leckie from the Idaho PUC. He's rescheduled to come back and chat with us about legislative updates on energy issues. And in May, we have hopefully Alana Rubel, I think is gonna do a legislative wrap up. So I think Ty Nelson and then Dylan for May, if you guys just wanna check back in with your folks and make sure we're all still lined up and ready to go. Elections, another exciting topic. Keep an eye out for an email on upcoming elections, and do let us know if you have any interest in helping out, taking on some responsibility with one of these roles. One more topic. I think Mark wanted to touch base quickly to see if we had any potential service opportunities again this year. I know he's been looking into maybe doing another trail crew work in the foothills. Was there?
So I think based on our response last fall, it seems like perhaps it'd be better to organize it around an existing trail work day that the Land Trust had already planned. They have a big one coming up in the Harrison Hollow where they're pushing to connect a series of trails. That's on May 2nd. There's some other opportunities in April, but I just wanted to get a general sense of the group's interest in possibly joining on that May 2nd date.
I will let you all know that May 2nd is the Riggins Rodeo weekend, so if you're out of town, that's a potential conflict.
And May 2nd is Saturday. So
I think the Land Trust is doing over by Hidden Springs around Earth Day, whatever that, it might be the weekend before.
yeah, they have a series of trail builds kind of scheduled throughout that April, early May timeframe. But I know they're trying to make a big push on the May 2nd date. So it would be something that we wouldn't have to produce a certain number of people. We can just all sign up and show up. They provide lunch for that. It would be a good opportunity to get out and put some work into the trails we all need.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great opportunity.
So Mark, it would be by the trailhead behind the Highlands Hollow area?
I believe so. I could confirm that in an email to the group.
With the work end at the Highlands Hollow.
Absolutely.
Just a thought.
Or maybe begin there.
Okay, great. Well, please keep that in mind. We'll circulate some more emails to let everyone know that you're all welcome to join and help the section do more good things. And so now we are very excited about our CLE presentation today about the greater sage grouse. We have Michael Bogert here with us and Liz Schulte on the phone and I think on Google Hangouts watching us on video.
You can wait to work.
Very exciting. And Andrea has done a great job organizing this presentation. I'll let her say a few words and we'll get right into it.
So sadly, I have to admit, I never would have known we had such experts in our midst had I not read the little species version of the ABA Natural Resources Environment magazine from the winter. And it caught my eye because greater sage grouse is something that I know a number of us are interested in or have worked on. So I reached out to Liz, who was uber receptive. She's marvelous. And she actually is a lot like us. She's involved with the Utah sister section, just like our bar section. So I've promised in the future, maybe there'd be a chance for some dual work between our section and theirs, right, Liz?
Yeah.
And then she recommended that if we do this, we also invite Michael Bogert. So I'll start with him. He likes to hang out with governors, it appears. Governor Wilson in California, he might have done some work with the governor in California as well. But mostly he's done some work with Senator and then Governor Kemp Thorne, both doing all sorts of policy advice here, and then when the governor became the Secretary of the Interior back in DC. So you're sharing time between Boise and the DC offices. We're happy he's here with us. So he, I do have to do a shout out. He did get a degree from the University of Idaho, some college of law that's there. I know a number of you would be happy to know that he's one of you. Liz, of course, is a little bit closer to me. She actually went to Utah State for something, which is nice to have another Aggie in the area. She didn't go to an undergrad. I had to look this up. I didn't know where Hobart and William Smith Colleges was. It's in New York. And they prepare students to lead lives of consequence. I thought that was really foretelling. She's done a number of things, including working at State Utah chapter of the Nature Conservancy. They are experts in all sorts of environmental law. We're really happy to have both of them here to talk to us remotely and in person about the greater sage grouse. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to start, this is my first question. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. I'm going to try not to look at the video because the timing is a little bit off, and so then I get confused when I'm listening and watching that. So I'm trying not to look at you guys, but I will say it's the first time I've presented in this format, and it's hopefully it won't be too challenging. I did hear the microphone picks up certain sounds, so I heard somebody had shoulder surgery recently, and I just wanted to say I feel your pain. Hopefully you're doing better.
Doing much
Good. So, and I also want to say thank you so much, Andrea, and to your section for inviting us to present today. We're going to be flying at a pretty high altitude because first of all, I guess partly because of time and partly because I think there are varying degrees of information and background amongst the audience. So Andrea has asked us to present on based on the article and just to provide an overview of what's happening with the greater sage grouse development and potential listing. So to give you a quick overview and some context, some of you might be wondering why the greater sage grouse is engendering so much discussion right now. And considering that there are hundreds of species that are listed or petitioned for listing or actually petitioned for delisting on a regular basis, and we don't often hear about them. But the greater sage grouse is a very interesting species, and it is an interesting political discussion because it affects 11 western states, which include Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Montana, Colorado, Nevada, California, Washington, Oregon, and North and South Dakota. So it also stands to potentially impact approximately 160 to 165 million acres. So it's a lot of land, unlike other species which are a little bit more isolated or concentrated to a specific area. They're also an interesting species because they occupy different habitats depending on different life cycles of the bird. And just to give you a quick background on some of the health issues or why the bird has been petitioned for a listing is that it was, I mean, there's no doubt, everyone agrees, it was once very prolific in the Lewis and Clark era, and this was during the second half, this was during the 1800s. It wasn't until the second half of the 20th century that population declines became markedly noticeable. And Fish and Wildlife Service estimates today there are somewhere between, and this is a pretty big range, but between 100,000 to 500,000 greater sage grouse that still exist. And that is a significant decline from the 2 million that were believed to exist previously. And also the area of habitat that they occupy has significantly declined. And they were once known to occupy approximately 290 million acres of sagebrush habitat, and now they're about half of that. And something else that we'll talk as we get more into the presentation, but the science also is suggesting that the declines have actually decline in populations have actually slowed down significantly. And so for all of these reasons, this is why you're hearing about the greater sage grouse pretty much everywhere you go. And I think, I can't tell if you have a picture of the bird up there right now.
I did, Liz. What I did
Okay.
was, I went to the, to sort of the map of the region.
Oh, great. Okay, so I can't actually see that for some reason. So the map that you're looking at is just to give you an idea of the expansive geographical area of the greater sage grouse habitat. And this comes out of the BLM's land use plans, or we'll talk about resource management plans, which is the BLM's land use plan mechanism. And so it goes to show, it evidences the jurisdiction of BLM and their subregions that they'll be managing for greater sage grouse. So do you mind going to the next slide?
Not at all.
Okay. So just again, with the broad picture here, what's at stake when we're talking about a potential listing? There's between 160 to 165 million acres that will potentially be managed for species conservation. This will, if they are listed under the Endangered Species Act, this will require Section 7 consultation, and Michael's going to talk a little bit more about this to provide ESA context. And it also means, and probably, you know, most significantly, is this judicial review of any kind of effort or land use activity in these areas that are being managed, whether under whether under Fish and Wildlife Service if they're listed, but also when we talk about these BLM resource management plans. So there's a lot at stake, and therefore there are a lot of voices that have joined the conversation. And so now I'll let Michael give a brief overview in the next few slides on the Endangered Species Act so that you all have a context for the dialogue between the greater sage grouse and what's happening.
Well, Liz, the good news is I'm looking around the room here, and just about everybody I can see has probably had some interaction with a Section 7 consultation. The heads are nodding, so this part of the presentation is going to go real quick. Of course, just a real brief overview. Under Section 4 of the ESA, particularly with the focus on the sage grouse, all of the conservation efforts, all of the policy discussion, all of the investment by the federal and non-federal parties have been focused on Factor A, which is the threat, destruction, modification, or curtailment of the habitat of the sage grouse itself, which we just saw on the map. But a lot of the discussion has been over the adequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms, and I'm looking at Sam, who knows this well, out of OSC for the state of Idaho, which is namely, what is it that the states are doing, or what is it that the federal government is doing that adequately would regulate either in a pre-listing environment or a post-listing environment, presumably at some point if the health of the species was vigorous enough to be delisted. So it's the same test moving in or out of a listing decision, and under Section 4, Factor A and Factor D in particular are the focus from what we've seen. Why do we know this? Because back in 2010, we'll talk about the original warranted but precluded determination by the service, indicated that in particular Factor D and the lack of certainly state plans that had existing adequate regulatory mechanisms were, in the view of the Fish and Wildlife Service, deficient in some means, either from a state perspective, and we'll talk about what BLM and the Forest Service are doing with the land resource management plans to address Factor D. And then, of course, there's always the issue of not only Section 7 consultation with respect to any direct impact on the species, but also adverse modification of designated critical habitat, which in this administration, we'll talk about the Gunnison listing in a second, is going to be coincident with the determination of the initial rule of whether to list, and of course the final designation of critical habitat with respect to the final rule. This is a very sensitive little thing here. So very quickly, the key provisions of the ESA, we just talked about Section 4, the 5-factor test. Interestingly, and this is very relevant, and I'm just looking at Sam, to the extent that state conservation are accommodated in the trajectory of a decision whether to list, the investment by the states, not only here in Idaho and across the West, are to be calibrated in some factor with respect to an ultimate listing decision. There's a lot of discussion in the states about how that's accounted for. it almost is actionless. I mean, you can't really propose a cause of action because of an inadequate consideration of state conservation. Section 7, we talked about consultation. Of note, even a threat with a 4D rule, we'll talk about that, doesn't avoid Section 7 consultation with respect to all activities that have a federal nexus throughout the range. Section 9, that's the prohibition on take, and then we'll get into what a 4D rule is in particular, because that seems to be the template out for the lesser prairie chicken out in the Southwest and what we saw in the Gunnison sage-grouse listing decision in Colorado. Well, this is 7, right? This will be the last of this slide. Usually, there are two means by which species are proposed to be listed. The overwhelming majority of listing determinations are based on petitions, and usually by the non-governmental, the NGOs, the environmental NGOs that come forward. There are supposed to be limited but substantive elements to a listing petition. The most famous one was on the back of a matchbook several decades ago. It has been held up as kind of, if you will, the model of the inadequacy of information that sometimes is required for a listing petition. And then agencies can do this internally, sua sponte, and come forward with a determination from the consulting agencies. And in Interior, it's Fish and Wildlife Service, and over at the Department of Commerce, the salmon wars, the anadromous fish, it's nymphs over at the Department of Commerce. So that's usually how these go. Sage grouse came, I want to say 15 years ago originally by Western Watersheds and others out in the West. So Liz, here, I'll finish this. The three types of listing findings, why this is important, with respect to a proposed listing, there are 3 options that the listing agency has. One is not warranted. That is immediately reviewable. That's final agency action and subject to immediate review by a district court. Warranted, which means that obviously the listing is warranted. And then the third option, warranted but precluded, which was the determination we just talked about back in 2010 with respect to the sage grouse. During the first term of the Bush administration, the Fish and Wildlife Service determined that the listing of the grouse was not warranted. That was litigated in front of Judge Windmill here in Idaho that went back on remand. Ultimately, there was some discussion at the end of the Bush administration, and the outcome of that litigation was warranted but precluded by the Obama administration in 2010. Subsequent to that 2010 warranted but precluded determination, the administration entered into a stipulation with several environmental groups for close to, I want to say, Liz, 257 specific species. That by a certain stipulated schedule, of which the greater sage grouse was one, there would be a determination by the administration for 2 of the 3 options, warranted and not warranted. But warranted but precluded was not a part of the stipulated outcome by the administration with several of the ENGOs. And why that's important is that there are several pieces of outstanding litigation. All of them have been consolidated in Washington, D.C. that will test whether or not the administration can simply stipulate away a section of the ESA that always remains a directive from Congress for to be considered under the ESA for a listing determination. There are 2 cases in Washington, D.C., and one that was recently filed in the district court in Nevada, challenging the stipulation, particularly focused on sage grouse, whether or not you can simply obviate the need for one of 3 options under the ESA to make a listing determination. So Liz, I guess we'll get back to you. Any questions on that?
Yeah, and I should add, at any time, and we'll take questions at the end too, but at any time, if anybody, I mean, this can be a free-flowing format, so feel free to jump in and ask a question as we go. So are you now on slide 10, Michael?
I am on 9.
Oh, but you can, I think we mostly just covered that.
All right, sounds good.
So if you don't mind jumping ahead.
Liz and I did not rehearse this. We talked about it, we did not have a trial run.
Okay, so now let's start getting into a little bit more of the meat of the discussion. And as Michael already touched on, in the warranted but precluded finding, one of the factors, the listing factors that the Fish and Wildlife focused on was this inadequate regulatory mechanisms, that was that factor D. And so based on that finding, there are 2 important things that happened. First, then Secretary of Interior Ken Salazar invited the affected western states to develop what he said, some state-specific regulatory mechanisms to help address the Fish and Wildlife Service's concerns. So that's an important thing to note. The second thing to note is that based on this inadequate regulatory mechanism finding, BLM and Forest Service, because they manage so much of the greater sage-grouse habitat, underwent this, really, I would say it's an unprecedented review of their resource management plans, their RMPs. And this is often referred to as, in acronyms, and we all speak in the acronym language, LUPAs, these land use plan amendments. And that resulted in the BLM and Forest Service preparing 15 environmental impact statements, reviewing their resource management plans in the affected western states. Additionally, what came out of these findings is that BLM convened a national technical team, which is the NTP, and they prepared what they saw as the best available science. So it's the NTP report, which Michael will talk a little bit more about, and that the NTP report was to be used by the BLM in developing their EISs. In addition, so there are all these factors, and this is why we're trying to give you all the different pieces that come together, and I kind of visualize it as three trains kind of heading towards the same point, and we can see them further away from the epicenter, but they're all on this trajectory, kind of prepared to collide in some ways. Fish and Wildlife Service also put together the Conservation Objectives Team, which is COT, it's often referred to as COT, and COT developed these conservation objectives in advance of any listing, and this is a guiding document for the Fish and Wildlife Service agency. Okay, sorry, Michael, I'm going to go back to you. The next slide is discussing science, so it touches on the reports that I just mentioned.
Well, then we can move back with the legislative activities. So Liz was talking about the NTT report. This was fundamentally an early effort and it was driven by the Bureau of Land Management in an effort to sort of lay the foundation for what they believed to be the building blocks for the land use plan amendments. It was a very interesting process. Fish and Wildlife Service was pretty much on the outside, but the NTT process, and Sam, you might have some input on this, they invited the states to be a part of the NTT process and have the governors delegate. In our case, we had Fish and Game be a part of the NTT report. It's ubiquitous. It's out in the public domain, but it was very much an effort to at least assess and provide a science-based framework for the Bureau of Land Management to begin the building blocks of the fundamental elements for our land use plan amendments. The interesting part that came out of this, and this was leadership from Governor Otter's office, is there were several FOIA requests that we were able to take a look at in terms of the development of this. Fish and Wildlife Service was involved, a little bit more involved than one might have originally thought, but there was a lot of discussion from particularly some of the career folks at BLM about whether or not the fundamental science-based building blocks that were being discussed by a land use agency, the Bureau of Land Management, could overcome sort of the fundamental elements of organic law, such as the 1872 mining law. And this is a theme that we'll see as this ultimately careens to some final agency action. For example, a lot of discussion about existing and perfected mining claims on federal lands. And could the Bureau of Land Management just simply ignore long-held existing law with respect to trying to build a science-based approach to their land use management plans? A lot of discussion from the career folks at BLM saying, heads up, you guys may want to take a look at this. We can't simply override and have the ESA necessarily take precedence over existing valid mining claims that have been a part of our fabric of our federal land management infrastructure for quite a while. I would say probably about a year and a half later, the COT report, the Conservation Objective Team report, was developed by the Fish and Wildlife Service with as really the lead agency in an effort. If NTT could be described as sort of the baseline of the BLM land use plans, COT, for lack of a better term, were the goalposts by which the service would determine the blueprint by which they would evaluate the conservation measures that would be threaded into the BLM, and I might add, importantly, Forest Service, land use management plans to be evaluated for purposes of presumably getting to a not warranted decision on the list. So to the extent NTT was land use plan based with a science baseline, COT ultimately was talking about the end product, which was how would we get to a listing decision. The most recent developments, I would think from the, and Liz, feel free to jump in on this, is what's occupied a lot of discussions, and I brought this. So Andy, I got Liz's article as well as some things that if you wanted to scan, and I've got these, I can scoot them back to the group. An interesting letter by a group of scientists just a couple of days ago, March 12, 2015, talking about, including several scientists from the University of Idaho, I might add, talking about their view of the current state of the science and the inadequacies of what they were seeing from both BLM as well as the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service with respect to the state of the science. It got quite a bit of press in the geek newsletters that we all get from Greenwire and Law 360. I know David probably gets it. And I'll leave this with you because I think this is an effort by outside scientists to try to provide what they view as to be the best available science, which is one of the hallmarks of decision making under the ESA. So Liz, that's what I'll say about the science. I wanted to scoot to the next slide. Is that right?
Yeah, and well, before you do, I mean, I would just add that as everybody knows, that best available science is the threshold for a listing determination, and that has really been probably the most troubling and controversial part of this conversation, because as Michael said, there's this NTT report which has gotten a lot of outside criticism from scientists saying that it lacks adequate sampling, it doesn't use appropriate equipment, or it has biases. But you also have, as Michael said, based on the FOIA request, that evidence that there's even internal conflict with whether or not the NTT's approach is valid and represents the best science. And then I would also add that there's been, I don't know, I think I know which report Michael's referring to there, but there's been a lot of additional science that's come out, including one that I would just mention, Dr. Zink, who has also challenged some of the science about what's happening with greater sage-grouse populations and their resiliency. And so I think that is part of what's making this very complicated. The science is still very much evolving, and it's, you know, we wish we had more science and wish to make some of these decisions. So, okay, next slide. So we talked about, so I think it's the next slide because that says the science. So I'm ready to go to slide 12.
Got it.
Okay, great, thanks, Michael. So we briefly touched on kind of what's been some of the responses to this warranted but precluded finding in 2010. And I said that BLM responded very sharply with doing this significant land use plan amendment process. And part of why BLM jumped so high is because the federal agencies, just an important kind of background, federal agencies are responsible for managing approximately 75% of the greater sage-grouse range, and of that, 60% is administered by the BLM. So they are clearly the agency with primary responsibility for managing the majority of greater sage-grouse habitat. And this, coupled with the finding of a lack of adequate regulatory mechanisms, prompted BLM to respond sharply. And they underwent these 15 EISs. The first one was actually a record of decision was issued in last summer, and the remaining 14 are expected to be issued at the very end of summer of 2015, which coincidentally the Fish and Wildlife Service is under the stipulated deadline to make a listing decision by September 30th. So all of a sudden we're having two agencies with their deadlines quickly approaching at the same time. And it's also important to remember that the framework by which the BLM and the Fish and the Forest Service develop these land use plans is through FLTMA and NIFMA. And so, as you know, those statutes represent this mandate for these agencies to strike a balance between the competing land uses, these commercial goals, and also the environmental objectives. I think I just mentioned that the Lander RMP was issued in June, And in most of these EISs, the preferred alternative that you'll see is an approach that's really outlined by the NTT report, and it's following those conservation criteria. And just to give you an example of the preferred alternatives following NTT, and these vary a little state by state, but just generally, they all have a disturbance cap of some sort. Generally, the disturbance cap is 3%, meaning that you cannot, in priority habitat areas, so those are the key habitat areas, the agency is saying under those areas, you can't have more than 3% total disturbance. And that actually includes existing disturbance. So that means in priority habitat, there may be no further activity authorized if you've already met the 3% disturbance cap. And they also have what's called NSOs, or no surface occupancy criteria, and so that they have strict limitations as to where surface activity can occur if there's an active lek. And so obviously the industry and the regulated community is concerned that these NSOs kind of create a very, I would say, a de facto withdrawal, even though the EISs also address specific withdrawal from future activity. Let's see, is there anything else I want to say?
Yeah, let me just talk
Oh, yeah.
This, what Liz was talking about, the time frame between the final decision, the records of decision on the land use management plans, coupled with the recently reconfirmed commitment by the administration to make a listing decision by the end of September, is one justification we'll talk about with respect to the state plans and their effectiveness and how this is going to feed into the factor D analysis on the listing. So that lack of time between the final agency action on the land use management plans coupled with a commitment by the administration to come up with a proposed listing rule one way or another in that time frame is one of great quandary to those of us that have been tracking this. Sorry, Liz.
Yeah, no, great, good point. Next slide. So that's one big train. So we talked about Fish and Wildlife Service and that train that's heading on a trajectory for a listing decision. We just briefly, and again, I mean, there's so much we could do 2-hour presentation on just the BLM EISs, but that's another train that's heading on course. And like Michael said, that will be, the records of decision are expected late summer, early fall. Another response, and I'm going to talk about the state plans in a moment because that's probably of most interest, but before that, there's been a lot of legislative response to what's happening. And as an example, and I know Utah a little bit better just because I'm following it here, but so Utah, last year in 2014, the legislative session earmarked $2 million for a greater sage-grouse listing, and it was for a lobbying effort. And they've actually just done another $2 million this year. They've earmarked the same amount to do some sort of legislative delay. And they've also funded $1 million for litigation to defend against any kind of listing for the greater sage-grouse. But interestingly, they've also earmarked $900,000 for the protection of the greater sage-grouse. So there's a lot happening in Utah, and I know other states are also discussing and looking at funding different greater sage-grouse litigation strategies. And the reason for that, especially for the delay of any kind of listing, is that the states are really working towards having their state plans have an opportunity to be in effect for at least 10 years to make sure to see if they can be effective and provide the adequate regulatory mechanism that Fish and Wildlife Service is so concerned about.
I'm going to say, hang on, Liz. Do you have anything you want to say about Governor Otter's plan?
The state plan?
Yeah.
Well, so with state lands, Idaho Department of Lands is currently putting together, and they just put out a draft plan, I believe a month ago. It got hounded pretty heavily, so they've delayed that. The land board's got a vote on it. But the issue now, as Governor Otter is kind of waiting because we've gotten kind of a lot of pushback from the Fish and Wildlife Service on our RMP amendments that we were just talking about earlier, that Governor Otter's kind of waiting to make any sort of commitment on state lands until he can get some sort of assurance that the plan for Idaho on federal lands is going to be moving forward. And so we're kind of on a holding pattern, which is going to be interesting to see what Michael was talking about with the timing with these RMPs coming out later this year, and then wanting to see something on state lands. We just don't have time to provide them with any sort of assurance that what's gonna happen on state lands is gonna be productive at all. It's gonna be, this summer is gonna be really exciting. And then,
That's a nice way to put it.
I put that in quotes.
And Idaho was similar. Idaho put $750,000 towards sage grouse conservation. My office got $500,000 of that. Department of Lands got $250 for their state lands process. And then I think today in the Idaho legislature, they're on the second or third reading. I just got on a CR for that 10-year pushback, requesting that the federal legislature extend this by 10 years. And then there's also been talk of $1 million in the defense fund for inevitable litigation.
That sounds similar to Utah.
Yeah.
All right, Liz, Andrew, you want to wrap this up by one shot?
Oh, sorry, what?
Trying to wrap this up?
Yeah.
Oh, is it time?
No,
Well,
we're-
no, you've got time.
Okay, well, I'll move a little quickly. I'm sure everybody's well aware of the appropriations bill that was passed in late 2014. And that just, we keep getting wrinkle after wrinkle on this listing decision. It's pretty interesting. And basically, it's a little bit confusing, but basically, in that appropriations bill, it just says that Fish and Wildlife shall not use money to write or issue, and I put that in quotes, listing rules. And for greater sage grouse. And so nobody's really clear exactly what that means, but I guess Jewel has come out already and said that they're going to be marching forward and they're going to be doing whatever they can right now, short of taking the federal action that is expected in September. So it remains to be seen how Fish and Wildlife Service will interpret the appropriations bill, and it remains to be seen what Congress will do in September. So that just adds another curious element to the issue. So next one. So we'll just talk state conservation plans. So as I said before, that Salazar invited the states when the warranty book concluding finding came out in 2010, and he invited the states to start developing their state conservation plan. And this is in part because there is significant greater sage grouse range on state and privately owned lands, and that's about 30% of the habitat. And so the state plans were obviously intended to address Fish and Wildlife Service's concerns and preclude the need for listing. And obviously the importance of that is no listing means wildlife stays managed as a resource by the state, and there's not this federal oversight of managing wildlife resources. It's interesting, these state plans are important because greater sage grouse habitat and the current population vary state by state and even locally within a state. And also the different stressors or the different impacts to greater sage grouse habitat and vary state by state. And so, for example, Wyoming is home to more than 50% of the existing greater sage grouse population. But obviously it has a thriving oil and gas economy, and it also has a ranching economy. So that makes for a unique situation that other states more on the periphery of the habitat aren't experiencing. Idaho is also, maybe doesn't have as much strong a population as Wyoming, but Idaho, Dan Ash actually issued a letter in October 2014, and he identified Idaho as part of what he calls the greater sage grouse, quote, stronghold area. Utah is in the same boat, Wyoming, Montana. And it means that these strongholds are where they're the highest densities of the birds, but they're also the most resistant and resilient to some of the stressors. And so he has suggested to BLM that these stronghold areas should have the strongest levels of protection, and that would give the agency more comfort that there were adequate regulatory mechanisms in place. Let's see, I'm trying to.
Let me jump in, including, anybody been by Craters of the Moon? Including Craters of the Moon. Anybody seen a lek of a sage grouse at Craters of the Moon? It's a rhetorical.
So the state plans are pretty nascent still. I mean, a lot of states have been working, like Idaho actually has been working on a state plan for a long time. And although the governor organized a task force of 15 working members in 2012, this was to add on to previous state effort to look at conservation measures for the state of Idaho. So the state plans haven't had a chance to be implemented on the ground to see how their effectiveness, and that is part of the conversation and part of the reason that we're pushing, or a lot of states are pushing for a legislative delay, because people feel, and the states and the governors feel very strongly that their state plans are effective, they're stringent, they follow the science that's been out there both with NTT and NCOT, and that they have the regulatory mechanism sufficient to do what needs to be done in order to avoid any kind of listing. But of course, they haven't been on the ground very long, and so there remains some question as to their effectiveness.
Sam?
Okay, Michael, next.
Okay.
So, I'm ready for the next slide, which I think is you.
All right, so we'll try to sort of put an envelope around all this in terms of what the answers to what's at stake and the key issues ahead. I don't think any governor in the West, Governor Otter included, perhaps Governor Otter the most committed, got into this to simply say, nice try, we're gonna list the bird anyways, and hopefully your state conservation plan and all the negotiations you've had with your livestock industry, your energy constituents, your ag constituents, your mining constituents, will simply end up being some platform or some framework down the road, but the bird gets listed. I think across the board, all of the Western governors are saying, we got into this to get to not warrant it. So the issue is there enough, going to be enough, in terms of the science, the scientific basis, absent data that shows effectiveness, and that's going to be a key issue down the road. Can you assume effectiveness? And that the cases are legion saying you cannot assume conservation effectiveness. We know everybody across the board, even the great state of Utah, and full disclosure, we are affiliated with the lobbying effort, our firm is, with the state of Utah. Everybody wants to do their fair share to conserve the bird. Key issues are, is there enough range wide? As far as we know, there's a lot of discussion about a distinct population segment somewhere in the range. As far as we know, Sam, the listing decision is going to be made range wide. So does everybody have enough on the table to contribute to a not warranted determination, at least in the proposed rule that we'll see in September? This is probably the biggest single issue that ultimately the Obama administration is going to have to deal with. So a lot of discussion. We saw this with the lesser prairie chicken, and Andrea brought a copy of the 60-day notice and the complaint filed by the state of Colorado. Ultimately, probably the two largest decisions that are a harbinger of what could happen with the greater sage grouse all ended up being a listing of threatened with a special 4D rule. Everybody know what a 4D rule is? We know what that is? A special 4D rule. Just to sum it up, there is no statutory organic obligation to extend take protection to a species listed as threatened. By rule, the Secretary has authority under Section 4D of the ESA to extend conservation protection to threatened species at the discretion of the Secretary. There is a default rule in the Code of Federal Regulations that, as a matter of law, extends take protection to threatened species. It's not on the face of the ESA, it's what's known as a special rule. So that default rule that extends take protection to threatened species exists unless there is another special rule that provides management flexibility to a species that's listed as threatened. So what happened with the lesser prairie chicken and what happened with the Gunnison special population of the grouse is the state plans that were negotiated ended up being the conservation alternative, and therefore the so-called more flexible management opportunities to the regulated community once a listing determination was made as threat for the prairie chicken and the Gunnison sage grouse. The problem with that is all of the negotiations, and I'm looking at Sam again, we got into this to get to not warranted. We didn't get into having our state plan be the conservation alternative under the ESA, only to endure Section 7 consultation, because you can't get out of Section 7 consultation with the bird listed as threat. So Governor...
I was just going to add, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, Governor Hickenlooper, and Andrea, I'll give you his complaint. It's 60-day notice filed in December. of last year. The complaint filed just this past February said that's unacceptable to us. The listing determination should have been not warranted. We spent 40 million state dollars trying to conserve this bird, Gunnison. The population numbers are up. How on God's green earth can this be threatened with a 4D rule? We don't want our state conservation plan as an alternative to a threat listing. That's, we think, is sort of the harbinger and the preview of what we might see with respect to the range-wide listing determination of the sage-grouse. And Andrew, I'll give you these two documents because I think it's instructive as to what the roadmap might be for us in the range. You got the talking points on the Lander RMP. Liz, did you want to say something? Because I'm going to zip through these. We're running up against our time frame.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that not only are those the recent activities harbingers, but Dan Ash has actually been on the record saying that he thinks the greater sage-grouse is in relatively good shape as of last spring. So, you know, I think it's very likely we are going to see this threatened with a 4D rule. That's all I was going to add.
Yep.
Go on.
All right, let's see what we got here. We talked about
I think we're almost
prairie
there.
chicken. Touched on this briefly, but the more modern template that I'll leave for you is the Gunnison sage grouse. And then, Liz, you want to take us through the last slide on the conclusion?
Sure, and I guess we'll just be quick. The conclusion is more, it's more questions than conclusions. And the questions that are still out there are whether or not the science supports the listing. And as we touched on in the beginning, the science is all over the map. The scientists are all over the map on what is the best available science and whether or not the science does show that a listing is warranted at this time. Another question that's outstanding and only time will tell is whether or not these land use plan amendments are effective, and whether they'll be effective in a timely manner sufficient to address Fish and Wildlife Service's concerns. And also the question about how the state plans have been regarded and implemented in the decision-making process. And as Michael talked about, governors obviously have a significant role in what's happening and what's to come. It's clear there's going to be litigation, and the question will be going forward, you know, and none of us know this now, but who, what, when, why, how, where. We don't know. It depends on who's going to be. It really depends on the listing decision, but obviously litigation will occur. And I guess the one thing I would end on, kind of bringing it back to what we began on, is that part of why, you know, the greater sage grouse is garnering such discussion is that it has been an unprecedented effort, I would say, in collaboration. And whether or not that gets us to the end result that the states have been working towards, we don't know, but it certainly has been probably the first time that so many different interest groups, stakeholders, state agencies have really tried to come together to create a solution short of any listing. So that really, I know we moved through that fast and covered a lot of material on a pretty broad level, but I welcome any questions and, you know, or conversation.
I think you guys covered this, but just to confirm, so when the determination is made, either warranted or not warranted, that will be made, it's a binary thing, either all throughout the entire range, it's either warranted or not warranted, but we won't see a listing of within a smaller subset of that range or subpopulations or something like that.
Liz, I'll let you hop in. We don't see how it can be anything other than a range-wide determination. As far as we know, there is no distinct population segment of the greater sage grouse. There is a bi-state population that saddles between California and Nevada. The Gunnison was a unique population. They were a population, a species in and of themselves. A lot of discussion about, for example, the protectiveness of the Wyoming plan and how blessed Wyoming has been by the service with respect to their determination that it's an adequate regulatory mechanism, the governor's executive order. But to the extent that we believe, I mean, the working theory is there won't be a carve out, as far as we can tell, for any single accumulation of greater sage grouse across the range that we just described. So we know that BLM expects to issue, and Sam confirming on this, 2 records of decision to sort of be one rod in the east and one rod in the west with respect to the BLM land use plans. But ultimately that will go into the crucible by the Fish and Wildlife Service for one determination range-wide as to this species. We just don't see, I'm looking at Sam, we don't see any special carve-out for a state that may, in the view of the service, have a wonderful state plan that meets, at least in the service's view, of what Section 4D says is an adequate regulatory mechanism. We just don't see it.
Yeah.
So the states, Dylan, are in various states of maturity and in negotiations. Utah's at war. I mean, their legislature just, another bunch of million out the door. Governor Otter's patience, Sam, you've experienced this. He's been at the table probably as long as any of the Western governors to try to carve out Idaho's piece with respect to this listing determination, but even he's losing patience now. We think the lesson of the wolf delisting case is that it doesn't stop at the state borders. Just because you think your state plan, and in Idaho we were fiercely proud of our wolf management plan. It was approved. We got it through our legislature, heaven forbid. I mean, of all things, we got it through the third floor. But of course, Judge Malloy said, look, you got populations that just don't stop at the state borders.
Right.
And Wyoming, of course, was the weak link in that. And that's what Judge Malloy said with respect to the range-wide determination that the wolf deserved to be delisted based on sort of state boundaries. That's not the law. That's range-wide. And so taking that as a precedent, we think that there isn't any way around a range-wide listing determination made by the service.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Sam? I mean, you've lived this. So.
Oh, absolutely. Well said.
Sir.
Yeah, I'm Brian Sheldon for Schulte Autonomous Law Offices. My firm represents a lot of public lands ranchers, and so we're constantly dealing with this kind of this threat of waiting for the other shoe to drop once there's all these sage grouse RMPs and EISs get done. I guess my question is, to what extent would this continued uncertainty, both scientific, political, administrative, be a good argument for maintaining the status quo? And I ask that because we're always dealing with these, periodic renewals of grazing permits for every 10 years. But instead of preserving the status quo, the agency, usually the BLM, is saying, oh, well, we got to, create all these new sage grouse constraints, and all of a sudden, what used to be your spring pasture is now off limits or whatever. So, I mean, from an advocate's perspective, wouldn't it be a good idea to say, hey, let's just leave things as they are until we know what the official plan is, instead of speculating about what might be, what might not be?
Liz, you want to take a crack at that? I got a very emotional response to that.
Can you repeat it? I didn't hear all of that question. I'm sorry.
Well, basically, in light of all this uncertainty that's still up in the air, again, as an advocate for public lands ranchers, wouldn't a more cautious approach be to argue for maintaining the status quo as opposed to inventing these new constraints or whatever sideboards?
You mean to
in the name of sage grouse conservation?
I think the question is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is your question, until we have enough of a track record of performance.
Right.
Given the uncertainty, and by the way, BLM is in the same box that the state's going to be with respect to showing effectiveness. I mean, it's one thing to say this is an adequate regulatory mechanism. I mean, in other words, we can hold our permittees accountable under FLPMA for our land use management plans. The states have done enough with their non-federal lands to be able to contribute to sage grouse conservation. Why don't we let this work for a little bit before we get to a listing determination? I'm sorry, Liz, I got it. Just there's a school of thought that says, why do we need BLM land use planning at all? Just list the bird. Why? Because we can pull together proposed federal actions, and we live biop to biop anyways. I mean, you name the bird or the species, we know how to propose our activity on the least intrusive manner so we can survive for your guys in the cowboy world. Right? You go through Section 7 consultation on your grazing permits all the time. And a grazing permit is an adequate regulatory mechanism. Why? Because if you don't do what the permit says, you don't have your permit.
Terms and conditions, exactly.
Right. As a part of FLPMA and federal land use management, same on Forest Service land. If you don't do what the permit says, you don't have your permit anymore. That is an adequate regulatory mechanism. There is a significant school of thought that says, why are we going through this gymnastics with BLM and the Forest Service to talk about all this stuff when we don't know what the Fish and Wildlife Service is gonna do at the end. And by the way, they're asking the states for 20% more because we're not there yet. Just list the bird. Just list it and designate the critical habitat. We'll live biop to biop because we know how to do
And I
that.
would just.
Fire away, Liz, I'm done.
I love the passion. No, I
Well-
would just add stuff that, I mean, this was a big comment in the EIS comments was, what about this no action alternative, which is always considered in the
Right.
EIS process? And that there are significant already existing constraints out there that BLM is obligated to follow, that land users are obligated to follow. Isn't that sufficient until we know what Fish and Wildlife Service wants to do? So I would say there's a strong voice for, yeah, just to kind of stay the course until we have the direction from the ultimate agency.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Liz and Michael, so much for the awesome presentation. That was really great. We appreciate your time.
So Liz, I'm leaving behind your article, the 60-day notice Colorado, their complaint, and then the science letter of March. Is that okay, Andrea? And-
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope it was helpful, and feel free to shoot me an email or call if you have any other questions.
Oh, thank you. You guys certainly drew a big crowd, so we appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you very much.
And for anyone who wants to see a lead credit, make sure you sign up on the sign-in sheet.
They're all both here.
All right, Miss Liz, we'll see you.
Bye, Michael. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.